B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Yudalid. We're going to start from the next Mishnah, 12 lines from the top of the Omid. Says the Mishnah, Kol Shivas Hayomim, all the 7 days. We'll remember the previous Mishnah told us at the beginning of the Perek on Daf Yomi Daf, the Shivas Yomim Koidem Yom Kippurim, the 7 days before Yom Kippur, Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Mebeisei Lelishkas Parhedrin, the Kohen Gadol would be closed in the Lishkas HaParhedrin. What would he do for those 7 days? So the Mishnah here is telling us that obviously he wasn't locked there all the time. That's where that would be his dwelling place. During the day, he would be in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Beis HaMikdash proper, so to speak. He would be doing some of the avodas. In order to get him used to doing the avodah that he would have to do very meticulously on Yom Kippur, there were certain parts of the avodah that he was encouraged and required to do for the week before. Kol Shivas Hayomim Hu Zoyer Kesadam. He was the one to sprinkle, to throw the blood of the korban tomid onto the mizbeach. Umakteres akteres, he would burn the kteres, the incense. Umeitiv es haneros, and he would prepare the menorah, the candles of the menorah, the flames of the menorah. Umakriv es harosh ve'es haregel, and he would be the one to put the head and the regel, the feet of the korban tomid onto the mizbeach, because as we'll see in Masechet Tomid, they would cut the korban tomid into many pieces in order that a whole escort of kohanim would take it till the ramp of the mizbeach, and then from the ramp to the top of the mizbeach. But the hakrova of the rosh and the regel, that was given to the kohen gadol to do for that week. V'shar kol hayomim, all the other days in the year, im rotza lahakriv makriv, then the kohen gadol can choose whenever he wants to do the hakrova. He's allowed to. Shekohen Gadol makriv chelik barosh, he's the one that's allowed to choose to be makriv, to put onto the mizbeach whichever parts he wants. He gets the first choice. V'noitel chelik barosh, and the parts of the animals which the kohanim are allowed to eat, he gets the first choice. He can choose the nicest piece, the most tasty piece, whatever it may be. He has the first choice of the parts of the korban that would be eaten by the kohanim. Says the Gemara, Mantana, who is the author of our Mishnah? And what's the discussion here? Says the Gemara, let's see the Gemara. Omer of Chizda, Deloike Rabbi Akiva. It's certainly not like Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva ha'omar tohir shenoflolov hazah. Rabbi Akiva holds that a tohir person who was sprinkled upon by the water with the ashes of the parah aduma becomes tomei. Heicha ovid avoida. That means the Gemara's question was, the very fact that our Mishnah tells us that the kohen gadol would partake in some of the avoida means that he was obviously tahir enough to be able to do that. But according to Rabbi Akiva, it would seem, according to Rabbi Akiva, since we learned in the previous Mishnah that every day they would sprinkle on him, it would either every day, that we discussed exactly if it was every day or just day 3 and day 7, but they would sprinkle on the kohen gadol from the ashes of the parah aduma. And according to the Tana in the Mishnah, they would do that every day. According to Rabbi Akiva, if a tahir person, which this kohen gadol was tahir, they get sprinkled upon by the ashes of the parah aduma, he's actually tomei. How can he do the avodah? Tahir shenoflolov hazah, tomase heicha ovid avodah. How can he do the avodah? The Tanya. Where did we learn about this in the Brisa? So we learned in the Brisa as follows. The pasuk says, "V'hiza hatohir al hatomei." The tohir person will sprinkle on the tomei person. Bayem hashlishi, bayem hashvi, on day 3, on day 7, etc. Al hatomei tohir. So what do we deduce? This is Rabbi Akiva talking. What does Rabbi Akiva say? V'hiza hatohir al hatomei. Only because it's being sprinkled on somebody who is tomei, then he becomes tahir. Al hatomei tahir, and we deduce from there, Rabbi Akiva deduces from there, V'al hatohir. However, if you sprinkle from the parah aduma on a tahir person, tomei, it's actually going to make him tomei. Divri Rabbi Akiva, that was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. V'chachomim oimrim, they argue, the chachomim say that ein hadvorim halolu amurim. That means so Rashi says, what does it mean dvorim halolu? This that it says that al hatomei is coming to teach us that the whole concept of sprinkling, she'ein divrei hazah amurim elo b'dvarim hamekablim tuma, aval b'dvarim she'ein mekablim tuma ein hazah nitezes Aleim kruya hazoya. He says the whole concept of sprinkling from the water and ashes of the parah aduma is only considered an act of sprinkling of hazor if it's done on somebody who is tomei, namely somebody who can become tomei, somebody who's ro'i lekabel tuma. However, if you sprinkle on an animal, as we'll soon see, if you sprinkle from these waters onto an animal, and an animal whilst alive is not ro'i lekabel tuma, then that's not considered an act of sprinkling. What will it be? It's considered as using it. You've just used it. And there's halachic ramifications of the ashes of parah aduma that have been used for something other than sprinkling, other than doing hazor. That the halacha is, if you use this water for anything else, you can no longer use that part of the water as parah aduma water to make somebody toher. According to the Chachomim, when it says v'hiza atoyer al hatome, it means that it's only called hazor if you're sprinkling on something which is a ro'i lekabel tuma. Ein advarim halolu amurim elo b'dvarim hamekablim tuma. Mahi. Let's hear about this. Kedetnan, we learned in a Mishnah, niskavin lehazois ala behema. If you intended sprinkling from the ashes and water of the parah aduma onto an animal, v'hiza ala adam, and it turned out that you didn't sprinkle it on the animal, you sprinkled it on a person. If there's enough left over, ashes and water, if there's enough water left over on the azov plant, that you could still sprinkle from it onto a person, yeshane, you're allowed to now, you can sprinkle again, you can use whatever's left on it to sprinkle on a different person who needs to be sprinkled on. Because the fact that you sprinkled it on a person before was okay. That did not make it that it's not considered as if you used the water for something other than sprinkling. If you intended to sprinkle on a person and in actual fact you sprinkled on an animal, then even even if there's enough remaining water on the plant, the azov plant, which you dipped into the water to sprinkle, even if there's enough left on it that you could sprinkle on a person, lo yeshane, you should not use this water. This water has become possible because you've already used it to sprinkle on an animal. An animal whilst alive is not able to become tomei, and therefore it's not considered hazar. That's what the Chachomim learned from this pasuk. If it's not considered hazar, it's considered as if mayim shenasis ben melocha. It's water of the parah aduma that you did something else with, and then it becomes possible to be used to make anybody toher. So that is what the Chachomim learned from this pasuk. Says the Gemara, "My ta'am de Rabbi Akiva." Why did Rabbi Akiva choose to learn from this pasuk that if you sprinkle onto a toher person, that toher person will become tomei? Says the Gemara, "Nichtei v'rachmona," because the pasuk could have just said v'hizo hatoyer olav. Why does it have to say v'hizo hatoyer al hatomei b'yom hashlishi? Why doesn't it just say v'hizo hatoyer olav, that the toher person will sprinkle from the water onto him? Why does it have to say onto the tomei person? My al hatomei, why does it say the extra two words al hatomei? Shema Mino, says Rabbi Akiva, to teach us al hatomei tohir, because only if you sprinkle on a tomei person, that's when the tomei person will become tohir. Val hatohir, however, if you sprinkle on a tohir person, tomei will become tomei. Now, what do the Rabbanon do with that? So the Rabbanon, hai ledvorim hamekablim tuma hu da'asa. As we saw before, the Chachomim say that the extra two words ala tomei are not telling us that the person has to be tomei. It has to be a type of being that could become tomei to the exclusion of an animal. Aval hacha, but regarding your halacha Rabbi Akiva, that you sprinkle, that when you sprinkle onto a toyer person, it actually makes him tomei. Kal v'chomer, who the Chachomim say, I don't understand. It's a kal v'chomer that he's actually not going to become tomei. Im ala tomei. If sprinkling this water on a tomei person makes the tomei person toher, ala toher lekolshkin. Of course, if you sprinkle on a toher person, it will not make him tomei. So they don't even agree with Rabbi Akiva's idea. Had they agreed with that idea, then we can contemplate what we're using these two words for. The Chachamim say, you know why we chose to learn something else from this pasuk? Because we have a kal v'chomer that tells us not to learn like Rabbi Akiva is learning. Rabbi Akiva says, you're 100% right. It makes no sense. And that's exactly it. Hainu de ka'ama Shlomo, we know that parah aduma doesn't make sense. Even Shlomo HaMelech said, Omarti echkamo, I thought that I will be wise and discover the understandings of the halachas of Parah Aduma, it became clear to me that it was far from my perception. I couldn't understand it. And this is exactly what Shlomo Melech didn't understand. That how can you sprinkle on a Tomei person, it makes him Tahir, and you sprinkle on a Tahir person, it makes him Tomei. That is the difficulty of Parah Aduma. The Rabbanon say no. The Rabbanon say we still think that there's a Kal V'chomer, and it cannot be that when you sprinkle on a Tahir person, he becomes Tomei. And what do we learn from these two words, Al HaTomei, that it's only considered a Hazar if you sprinkle on something that's Roy Lekabel Tumah. Rabbanon, you're going to ask me a question now. So what was it that Shlomo Melech didn't understand according to us Rabbanon? I'll tell you what. That pasuk by Shlomo Melech is telling us, was that Shlomo Melech had difficulty understanding how can it be that Lemazeh, the person who is sprinkling, Ulemazin Olov, and the person who is being sprinkled on is Tahir, V'noigea bohen Tomei. However, if you touch the waters of the Parah Aduma, touching it can make you Tomei. And this is a pasuk. What does it say in the pasuk? The pasuk says, "V'hoyisolohem lechukas oilam umazei mei nida." The one who sprinkles will soon see how to understand this. But the one who sprinkles meha nida from these waters of the chatos it's called the chatos of the Parah Aduma, yechabes begodov. Not only is he Tomei, but even the clothes he was wearing also have to be toivled, have to be cleaned. But somebody who touches the waters of the Parah Aduma b'mei nida yitmad oref, he's Tomei until the evening. Not his clothes, but he's Tomei, has to go to the mikveh, and he's Tomei until the evening. So you see clearly that touching the mei nida makes a person Tomei. Nothing to do with if you sprinkle. You sprinkle on him. If a Tahir person sprinkles on anybody, Tahir or Tomei, it will make him Tahir. It will certainly not make him Tomei. If you touch the waters, then the pasuk says explicitly, become Tomei. So that's what the Rabbanon say. That is what Shlomo Melech had difficulty understanding, and that remained a difficulty. And now the Gemara, we have to understand what the Chachamim just said now. They said that Lemazeh ulemazin Tahir, Negea is Tomei. And that was the contradiction. That was something Shlomo Melech didn't understand. We have to understand, what's it mean what the Chachamim said, that Lemazeh, the one who's sprinkling, stays Tahir. Well, that's what they said. But we just read in the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Umazeh mea nida yechabes begodov." So there is always the option to understand that the pasuk is saying, "Umazeh mea nida yechabes begodov." Who is considered the mazeh? It doesn't mean a regular mazeh. It means hanoigea. It means the person that touched. We have to see if that works. Let's see the Gemara inside. Umazeh Tahir. Can Rabbanon really hold that somebody who sprinkles the Parah Aduma remains Tahir? V'aksiv, it seems to be against an explicit pasuk we just read. Umazeh mea nida yechabes begodov. That the person who's sprinkling the Parah Aduma waters actually has to even clean his clothes. His clothes need to be made Tahir. Says the Gemara, you're right. But the truth is, as the Chachamim said, the one who sprinkles the Parah Aduma remains Tahir. When the pasuk says mazeh, it doesn't mean the one who sprinkled. Umay mazeh, what does the pasuk mean that the mazeh is Tomei? Who's the mazeh? Noigea. It means the noigea, which is mentioned a few words later in the pasuk. Umazeh me'anido yechabes begodov. Who's that? Who's the mazeh? Referring to a type. It's referring only to the noigea. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense either. V'oksiv mazeh, v'oksiv noigea. The pasuk explicitly seems to say that mazeh on his own and Negea on his own. The pasuk says, "Umazeh me'anido yechabes begodov, v'negea b'me'anido yitmad orev." V'oid, are you going to suggest that the Negea is the mazeh and the pasuk's explaining itself? That doesn't make sense either, because the halachas are different. V'oid, mazeh, when the pasuk speaks about the mazeh, boya kibus begodim, he even needs to be metaher his clothes. Negea loy boya kibus begodim. However, regarding Negea, regarding touching, he doesn't need to be Mechabes begodov, his clothes are okay. It's just Yitmad Orev, he is Tomei. So it cannot be that Mazeh is Noigea. And the Chachamim say that Mazeh doesn't mean the one who sprinkles, because they said explicitly Lemazeh v'lemazin olov Tohir. So what does Mazeh mean in the pasuk? Elomai Mazeh Noisa. It means not the one who sprinkles, the one who carries. Anybody who carries the waters of the Parah Aduma is Tomei. Yichabes begodov. Says the Gemara, "V'nichtei Rachmana noisa." If the Torah means to say that anyone who carries from the water of the paraduma is tomei and is yichabis begodav, say that. Say v'anoisa me'anida. Why do you say hamazeh me'anida? No. Says the Gemara, because the pasuk wants to impress on us another halacha. My tam chsiv mazeh. Why does it say mazeh? Hakol mashmanon, to teach us the ba'inon shiur hazah, that if you carry just a tiny amount of the paraduma's water, you're not going to become tomei. Who's going to become tomei? When you carry enough, that there's enough water to be carried that you could have used that measure of water to sprinkle on somebody. Says the Gemara, according to the opinion that says, and this is a Gemara in Zvachim Daf Peit, Machlekes, according to the opinion that says that there's a certain minimum measure that you need to sprinkle on somebody, I can understand. The pasuk says umazeh, meaning carrying a measure that could be sprinkled with, because you need the minimum measure. But according to the opinion who says that there's no minimum measure of water that needs to reach this tomei person, how are you going to explain this? Why does the pasuk refer to the person carrying the water as mazeh, as something to do with the sprinkling? Says the Gemara, even according to the opinion who says that hazah, the sprinkling itself, there is no minimum shiur, which means hanamila agabo de gavra, there's no minimum amount of water that has to actually reach the body of the person who's being sprinkled upon. Aval b'mono. However, in order for the sprinkling to be valid, it has to be that you've dipped in this plant, and however the procedure went, but you took water from a dish that contained a minimum measure of water. Aval b'mono, however, in the utensil from which you took this water, tzricha shiur, it does need a minimum amount of shiur, and if you don't take from a utensil that held a minimum shiur, even though you hold that there's no minimum shiur that has to reach the person, it's invalid. Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Kamo yehei bohen v'yehei kedei hazah, how much does there have to be in the utensil in order that the hazah is considered valid? Kedei sheyitboil, in order you should be able to dip into the water, Roshe give oilin, the heads of the stems, v'yazeh, and be able to sprinkle with it. How much actually reaches the person, that doesn't matter, but it has to be enough that you could dip in, that the heads of the stems could be dipped into the water. So what the Gemara is saying is that this is the amount, this shiur, that everybody agrees you need a minimum measure of water in the utensil from which you sprinkle. That's the minimum measure. Everybody agrees that's the minimum measure when it comes to carrying. That when the pasuk says that umazeh me'anido yechabes begodav, which the Gemara says it means that you are carrying the me'anido, how much you're carrying, the amount that you need, the minimum measure that you could have done hazah from that, and everybody agrees that there is a minimum measure that has to be in the utensil. Continues the Gemara, Abaye Omar. Abaye is now coming and arguing with Rav Chizda. How did we start the Gemara? Right at the beginning of the Gemara, that the Mishnah said that the Kohen Gadol does the avodah. We had a question that if you sprinkle on him every day from the Parah Aduma, according to Rabbi Akiva, the person who gets sprinkled upon, it becomes tomei. He learns it from the pasuk of V'hiza atoyer ala tomei. So how can you say the Kohen Gadol can do the avodah? So Rav Chizda maintained that it must be that the Mishnah is not Rabbi Akiva. And Abaye is arguing on Rav Chizda. Abaye Omar afilu teimer Rabbi Akiva. It could even be Rabbi Akiva. The ovid avodah kula yoyim. It could be that the Kohen Gadol did the avodah the whole day. Ulepanyo, and in the evening when he'd finished the avodah, madu aleo, they would sprinkle up on him. V'tovil, and he would tovel and go to the mikveh before the end of the day. V'ovid hair of shemesh, and then it would become shkia, it would become hair of shemesh, and he would be torah the next day to do the avodah. So you could even hold of Rabbi Akiva that says that if you're sprinkled upon your tomei, and you can hold that the Kohen Gadol was sprinkled upon every day, and you can hold that the Kohen Gadol these 7 days could do the avodah. We found an easy solution, says Abaye, when you sprinkled on him at the end of the day. So there's no reason to say that our Mishnah cannot follow Rabbi Akiva. Continues the Gemara. What did we see in our Mishnah? Besides for the Kohen Gadol sprinkling, throwing the blood of the korban tomid on the mizbeach every day, what does it say next? Umaktir es hakteires. He burns the incense, the ketores. Umeitiv es haneros. He prepares the menorah to be able to be lit. What does that mean? Let's assume, and this is, it seems what Rashi learns, that you take out the wicks and the leftovers of the day before, and you put new oil and wicks into the menorah, preparing it to be lit. So what does it say first? First the Mishnah says that the ketores, and only then it says hatovas haneros. That is meitiv the neros. Says the Gemara, Umaktir es hakteres umeitiv es haneros. Alma, what do we see from the sequence of our Mishnah? Alma ketores bereisha. First you do the ketores, v'hadoneros, and only afterwards you do hatovas haneros. Uraminu, this seems to be a contradiction from a Mishnah in Tomid Daf Lamed Omid Beis. What does it say in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Misha zocha. They would cast, it wouldn't be lots, they would make a pious, and Misha zocha b'dishon mizbeach hapnimi. They would determine who was the one that would merit to clean the ashes off the mizbeach, of the inside mizbeach, where they would put the ketores. Misha zocha b'dishon mizbeach hapnimi, umisha zocha b'menorah, umisha zocha, and then who was zeicha to clean the menorah, umisha zocha b'ketores, and who was zeicha to do the ketores. So what do we see from here? That first, menorah there means the dishun ha-menorah, it means hatovas haneros, was done first, and only afterwards, misha zocha b'ketores. Only afterwards the ketores is mentioned. So the Mishnah in Tomid seems to learn that the dishun ha-menorah, the hatovas haneros, is done before the ketores. And in our Mishnah, it seems that the ketores is mentioned before that Tovas Haneros. There seems to be a contradiction. So we're going to have two explanations. Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. Omer Rav Huna says, Man Tana Tomid, that the opinion of Masechet Tomid is of Shimon Ish Hamatzbehu. There was somebody called Reb Shimon Ish Hamitzbeh, and we don't know exactly what he held, but we know that he had an opinion about the way, the order that the Avodah was done. So it could well be that since we know he had his opinion, and we know that the Chachamim argued with him in some areas, so we just assume that the Mishnayos in Tomid are following Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh, and our Mishnah here is the Chachamim, and indeed it's Machlekes Tanoim. Says the Gemara, V'ho'ibcha shaminon lei. But it seems to be in Masechet Tomid itself, I seem to have explicit proof that the Mishnayos in Masechet Tomid are not following Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh. Ditnan we learnt in Masechet Tomid, Boloi lekeren mizrachis tzfeinis, that the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen, whoever sprinkling the blood of the korban Tomid, he would come to the corner Mizrach Tzofin. Noisan, he would throw the blood Mizracha Tzfeina. He would throw it onto the corner, and it would be a single casting, and it would go on both sides, like a type of a gum, an L-shaped. The blood would reach the Mizrach wall and the Tzofin wall. Maravis Doremis, he would then continue walking round anti-clockwise to the corner Ma'ariv Dorim, Noisin Marava Dorema, and he would sprinkle the blood on a single throw of the blood onto the Mizbeach, and the blood would reach the Dorim and the Ma'ariv. That's the Mishnah in Tomid. V'tonya lo, there was a brisa on that Mishnah that says Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh, Meshane betomid, when he learnt this sequence, this halacha of the korban tomid, what did he say? He says, I agree with you regarding the first corner. Mizrachis tzveinis, when you reach the corner of Mizrach Tzofin, Noisin Mizrach tzveinis. You should throw the blood with a single thrust onto the corner, making sure the blood reaches also the Mizrach wall, also the Tzofin wall. Maravis Doremis wall, but when you reach the Ma'ariv Dorim wall, the diagonally opposite corner of Ma'ariv Dorim, then Noisin Marava, you should throw some blood first on the Ma'ariv wall, V'achar kach Noisin Dorema, and then you should separately throw the blood onto the Dorim wall. So you see clearly that it's Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh in the Brisa who argues with the Mishnah in Tomid. So how can you say that when you have a contradiction between the Mishnah in Yoma, that says first is Ketores and then Hatovas Haneros, and the Mishnah in Tomid that says first Hatovas Haneros, then Ketores, you're saying that the Mishnah in Yoma is the Chachomim, and the Mishnah in Tomid is Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh. We see clearly that the anonymous Mishnayos in Tomid do not follow Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpeh's opinion. Elam Rabbi Yochanan argues with the Rav Huna and says, Man Tana Seder Yoma will do the reverse. We'll say that our Mishnayos in Masechet Yoma are B'Shimon Ish HaMitzbehu, and the Mishnayos in Masechet Tamid, they will be the Chachomim who argue the B'Shimon Ish HaMitzbeh, and then everything is understood. And a very similar thing, the Gemara is now going to say, a similar idea where we have a stira in Mishnayos, and we just we arrange the Mishnayos, assuming that it's two different opinions, even though they don't say so explicitly. We find with a stira in Masechet Yoma itself. V'romi Seder Yoma Seder Yoma. There's actually a contradiction within Masechet Yoma. Ditnan, because what did we learn in our Mishnah? In our Mishnah we learned that you first do the Ketores, and then you do that Tovas Haneris. But there's actually another two Mishnayos in Masechet Yoma, later on, one in Daf Yomi Shiur, one in Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, and there we get a very different picture. Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Yomi Shiur, Pious Sheni, the second pious, it's a type of casting lots, which we'll learn about later on. What did they do with the second pious? They would determine Mi Sheichet, who's going to shech the carbon tomid, Mi Zoyrek, who is going to throw the blood on the Mizbeach, Mi Medashe in Mizbeach HaPnimi, who is going to clear away the ashes of the inside Mizbeach, Umi Medashe in Es HaMenorah, who's going to do that Tovas HaNeiros, Umi Male Vorim Lekevesh, and who's going to take the limbs of the carbon tomid to the ramp leading up to the Mizbeach. Pious Ashlishi, the next pious that they would do, is Chadoshim, the people who have never done Ketores before. L'Kteres, they would come and there would be a Geirol who's going to merit doing the Ketores. Bo V'Fisu, come, whoever hasn't yet done Ketores, come, we'll make a lottery, we'll see who's going to do it today. So what do we see from here? Then our Mishnah, it says, as we saw before, first Ketores and then Hatovas Haneros. And the Mishnah in Daf Chofei says explicitly that first they would do the Hatovas Haneros, and only afterwards they would do the Ketores. Hatovas Haneros was determined in the second pious, and the Ketores in the third pious. So there seems to be a contradiction within the Mishnayos in Yuma. So we're going to have two answers, Abaya and Rav Papa. Omar Abaya says, Lo Kashi is not a contradiction. Kan batovas shtei neiros, kan batovas chomesh neiros. Because there's actually going to be machlokas, which we'll soon see, between Abba Shaul and the Chachomim. The Abba Shaul holds that they would only do the Ketores after they've done the hatova, the cleaning and preparing of all 7 neiros, of all 7 lamps of the menorah. That's Abba Shaul. Now, even everybody agrees, even Abba Shaul and the Chachomim, obviously, they say that there was a break between doing the Hatova, between preparing 5 of the Neiros and the other 2. The question is, what did they do in that break? According to Abba Shaul, they would do the carbon tomid then. They would shech the carbon tomid, and this is all in the morning. They would shech the carbon tomid, they would sprinkle the blood, and then they would continue and do the last 2, prepare the hatova of the last 2 neiros, and after they've done the hatova of all 7 neiros, then they would do the ketores. The Chachomim say no. The Chachomim say that after doing preparing 5 of the neiros, hatovas haneiros on 5 of the neiros, they would then, in the break, they would do the ketores, and then they would do the hatova of the last 2 neiros. Sabaya is saying that the Mishnah, which is on Daf Yomi Daf in our Mishnah, where it says that you do the Ketores before the Tovas Haneros, that's talking about the Tovas Haneros of the last 2. The last 2 candles would be prepared after Ketores. The Mishnah on Daf Yomi Daf would be talking about the first 5 Neros, which indeed are done before the Ketores. And we'll soon see, the Papa is not going to like that. Why is the Mishnah first telling us about the last 2 and then talking about the first 5? Which is why Rav Papa is going to argue with Abaya. But for now, let's try and discuss Abaya. So that's how Abaya answered this seeming contradiction. So that's what Abaya said. Omar Abaya lo kashya kan batovas shtei neiros. The last 2 candles were prepared after the Ketores. Kan batovas chomesh neiros. But the 5 neiros were prepared before the Ketores. Says the Gemara lememra. So are you suggesting, and as Abaya holds, the B'Kteires Mafsikaluhu, that what they did in the break between Atovas 5 Neiros and Atovas 2 Neiros was the Kteires. V'Abaya Masadir Marocha Mishmei Gemara. Abaya would arrange the order of the Korban Tomid, and in the name of the Gemara, in the name of the tradition, in the name of the Gemara, and he would say as follows: Ubedam hatomid mafsik lahu. He would say that between doing atovas of the 5 neiros and the 2 neiros, they would actually do the dam hatomid, the korban tomid. They would do the shchitas hatomid and the zrikas adam of the tomid, and not the k'teres. Omra loy kasha. They said it's not a contradiction. Hahila Abba Shaul. Indeed, it's a machloikas Abba Shaul and the Chachomim, as we said before. And according to Abba Shaul, that's how Abaya arranged the Seder Marocha Mishmei de Gemara, according to Abba Shaul. However, the Mishnah is here that we're trying to make sure there's no contradiction between the Mishnah and Yoma Daf Yudaled and the Mishnah and Yoma Daf Chafei. That will be the according to the Rabbanon. And the Rabbanon, they actually did the Kteres between the Hatovas of the 5 Neiros and the Hatova of the 2 Neiros. Titania, we learned in a Brisa, Lo Yitaves HaNeiros v'achar kach yaktir. Don't finish doing the Hatova of all the Neiros and only then do the Kteres. Elo yaktir v'achar kach yitav. You should make sure to do the Kteres in the break between the Hatova of the 5 Neiros and the Hatova of the 2 Neiros. You should do the Kteres before you finish doing the Hatov of all the Neiros. That's the Chachomim. Abba Shaul Omer. Abba Shaul says no. Meitiv, you do the Hatova, you prepare all 7 candles, you do make a break between the 5 and the 2. You do the Korban Tomid then, but only when you've finished doing Hatova of all 7 Neiros, V'achar kach maktir, and only then you do the Kteres. My Tamid Abba Shaul, what would be the source for Abba Shaul that you do the Kteres only after finishing to prepare all the candles? It says in the Pasuk, Baboiker, in the morning, after you've finished preparing all the candles of the menorah, and then Yaktireno. That's what it says in the Pasuk, Baboiker, Beitivoy esaneris Yaktireno. The order says, first finish doing the Hatov of all the Neiros, only then do the Kteres. V'Rabbanon. The Rabbanon say no. The way you have to read it is as follows. What is the Torah saying? That Baboiker, Baheitivai, whilst you're finishing off doing the last Hatova, which is the last 2 candles, Tehei Miktar Kteres, Yaktireno, the Kteres should already be burning. Which means that you did the Kteres before you did the last part of the Hatova Saneris. Di'iloi Teimahachi. Because if you wouldn't learn like that, if you wouldn't understand Baboiker, Beitivo Yesaneris, Yaktireno means whilst you're finishing the Hatova, the Kteres should already be burning, we're going to have an issue with Beinu Arbaim, in the evening. Because what? Because we know that they did Kteres also in the morning, also in the afternoon. Beinu Arbaim. What does it say Beinu Arbaim? It says there, Uvahalois Aroin Esanerois Beinu Arbaim. When Aaron HaKohen would light the menorah in the afternoon, Yaktireno Kteres Tomid Lifnei Hashem L'Doreseichem, then one should do then the Kteres is being burnt on the Mizbeach inside, the small Mizbeach inside. So Hachanami, the Bereisha Madlik Neirois, V'hodor Maktir Kteres Shel Beinu Arbaim. So here we have an issue. The Chacham was saying to Abba Shaul, that you, Abba Shaul, how did you read the Pasuk regarding the morning? Is first finished doing the whole Hatova Saneris, and then Yaktireno. What are you going to read here? The that first do the menorah, and after you've lit the menorah, Yaktireno Kteres Tomid Lifnei Hashem D'Oreseichem, you should do the Kteres. That can't be. Everybody agrees that you cannot do the avoid of the Kteres after lighting the candles in the evening. So how do you have to read the Pasuk regarding the evening? That when Aaron HaKohen is lighting the candles in the afternoon, Yaktireno, then the Kteres should already be burning, because you did the Kteres before lighting the candles. Since you have to learn the Pasuk like that over here, you can learn the Pasuk in the morning the same way, that Baboike Beitiv Saneris, when you're finishing the Hatova Saneris, Yaktireno, the Kteres should have already been put on the Mizbeach before that. That's how the Rabbanon are refuting or are arguing with Abba Shaul. Are you going to suggest no? Maybe it's true. In the same way as Abba Shaul learnt the pasuk in the morning, first finish Hatavas Haneris and then do Kteres, maybe he'll learn first do the Hadlokas Haneris in the afternoon and then put the Kteres on the Mizbeach. That cannot be. Votani we learnt in the Brisa, Me'erev ad Boike. Because there's another pasuk. The pasuk says, Bo'oil moed michutz laparoiches hasha'alo eidos yarechi se'aron novonov me'erev ad boiker, that the candles, the menorah, should be lit me'erev ad boiker. It'd be lit from the evening and stay alight until the morning. What does it mean me'erev ad boiker? The Brisa says, 10 lombidosa, put the measure of oil enough shetehidu ileches v'ileches kol halayla, that it should be able to be lit the whole night me'erev ad boiker. Dava acher, and also besides for that, me'erev ad boiker ein lecha avoida shekshero me'erev ad boiker elozu bilvad. When it says the yarich oise ari novon of me'erev ad boiker, means this is the last avoida to be done in the erev, and nothing else is going to be done until the boiker. This is what's going to carry that, so to speak, be done from the night till the morning. Elozu bilvad. There is no avoida that can be done after Hadlokas Haneris. So then we have an issue. How there's no way of saying that you can actually do the Kteres after Hadlokas Haneris, because no avoid is done after the Hadlokas Haneris, and therefore even Abba Shaul would have to agree that the pasuk that says uvahalus aronis haneris beinu arba'im yaktirenu Kteres tomid lifnei Hashem l'doresechem must be that whilst Aaron HaKohen is lighting, whilst the Kohen is lighting the menorah, then the Kteres has already been done before that. And that's how the Chachamim are learning the pasuk in the morning, that when you finish doing that tova, the Kteres should already be done. Elomai ka'omar Rachmana, be'idon adloka. How do you have to learn the pasuk here in the evening, that whilst you're lighting the menorah, tehei miktar Kteres, the Kteres should already be lit. Hachanami says the Chachamim, be'idon atova, whilst you're finishing the Tavas Haneris in the morning, tehei miktar Kteres, the Kteres should already be lit. The Abba Shaul will say no. Shani hasam dichsiv oisoi. He says, in the morning, I'm not changing from what I said. The pasuk says that you should first finish doing all that tavas haneris and only then yaktirena. In the evening, I agree with you that you do the kteres before you do the Hadlokas Haneris. But over there, the reason is because I have a special pasuk. The pasuk says oisoi, that it says yarich oisoi arin, and from the word oisoi we learn that the only thing that gets done and the last thing that gets done at the end of the avodah is the menorah. So from that word oisoi, I know that I have to do the Kteres before the Hadlokas Haneris. But that's Gzeres HaKosov over there in the evening. In the morning where there's no Gzeres HaKosov, I'm reading the pasuk in the right order. But Tivayas Haneris, Yaktireno, you do the Kteres after you've done the Hatova of all 7 Neris. What do you do between the Hatova of the 5 Neris and the Hatova of the 2 Neris? The Korban Tomid, not the Kteres. That was how Abaya explained the contradiction between the Mishnah on Daf Beis, the Mishnah on Daf Yudalid, and the Mishnah on Daf Chofhei in Yuma. We had the contradiction: is Kteres before Hatova Haneris or after? The answer is it's following. Both Mishnayos are following the Chachamim. The first Mishnah is talking about the last 2 candles; those are done. Hatova is done after the Kteres, and the Mishnah on Daf Chofhei is talking about the first 5, and they are done before the Kteres. Rav Papa Omar, Rav Papa's got a different way of resolving this. Loi Kashya, Ha Rabbanon, Ha Abba Shaul. The first Mishnah is indeed the Rabbanon. And when the first Mishnah says you do first the Kteres and then the Hatova Haneris, is the Chachamim, that you do the Hatova of the last 2 Neris after Kteres, and as far as this Mishnah is concerned, it's the same as Abaye learnt. Ha Abba Shaul, the Mishnah on Daf Chofhei, which says that first they would do the lot on the Dishun HaMenorah and the Hatova Haneris, and only afterwards the Kteres, that's following Abba Shaul. As we just saw, Abba Shaul holds that first you do Hatova Haneris of all 7, and then you do the Kteres. Says the Gemara, so our Mishnah, you're saying, is Karabonon. The Mishnah Daf Yudalid Amud Aleph is following the Rabbonon, that there's part of that Hatova Haneris is done after the Kteres. Pious, The Mishnah on Daf Chof Hei, which is talking about the lots that they did, is talking about Abba Shol, that they first did the Tovas Haneros of all 7 candles, and only afterwards they did the Ketores. Eima Seifa. Let's move to a Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. What does it say in that Mishnah? What does it say in that Mishnah? Heviu Loyes Hatomid. They would bring to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Mishnah on Daf Chof Hei and the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph are actually talking explicitly about Yom Kippur. The Seder of the Avodah from Perek Beis and Perek Gimel, Daf Chof Hei is in Perek Beis, Daf Lamed Aleph is Perek Gimel. Perek Beis, Perek Gimel is actually talking about the Avodah of Yom Kippur. The Mishnah Ba'as on Daf Yudalid was not talking about Yom Kippur. It's talking about what the Kohen Gadol would do on the 7 days before Yom Kippur, which is referring to the Avodah of the whole year. But let's move now to the Sefer, Daf Lamed Aleph. What does it say there? Heviu Loi, they would bring to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, they would bring him as Hatomid, the Korban Tomid. Korotzoi, he would cut the minimum he has to cut for the shlita to be kosher. And since the Kohen Gadol had to do all the avodas on Yom Kippur, umorak acher shlita al yodoi, and then somebody else would finish off the shlita, and because the Kohen Gadol would have to receive the blood. Nichnas lehaktir es hatkteres. The Kohen Gadol would then go and put the ketores would and burn the ketores, ulehetiv es haneros, and he would do after the ketores, he would do hatovas haneros. So you see, the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph reverts back to the opinion that says that hatovas haneros was after the ketores. Also, that must be also in the Rabbanon, must following the Rabbanon, who says that after you did the ketores, you did that tov of the last 2 neros. Does that make sense? Reisha, V'Seifa, the Mishnah on Daf Yudalid, our Mishnah, and the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph are the Rabbanon. U'Metziasa, and the Mishnah in the middle on Daf Chof Hei is Abba Shol. Omar Lachar of Papa will explain, will say no problem in, yes. Reisha, V'Seifa, Rabbanon, Metziasa, Abba Shol. What's the problem with that? When you have Mishnayos, some Mishnayos follow one opinion, some Mishnayos follow another opinion. Now the Gemara continues. Bishlei Milab Abaya, I can understand why Abaya lo Omakr of Papa. Why did Abaya choose to say that all the Rabbanon, the first Mishnah is talking about the last 2 candles, and the second Mishnah is talking about the first 5, and then obviously the third Mishnah will be talking about the last 2 candles. He didn't want to learn like Rav Papa, because Reisha v'Sefer Rabbanon u'Metziasa Abba Shol, and the middle Mishnah to be Abba Shol, loy moikim lo. Abai wasn't comfortable with that. That's not the way to set up Mishnayos. Elo Rav Papa my tam lo omakar Abaya. What's the reason that Rav Papa said that the first Mishnah is Rabbanon, the second Mishnah is Abba Shol, the third Mishnah is again the Rabbanon? Why didn't he just learn like Abaya? It's all the Rabbanon, and it just depends which candles you're talking about. Omelachar of Papa will say, because Tana Bereisha Tovas Shtei Neiros V'Hoda Tovas Chamesh Neiros, because what did they do first? They first did the Hatova according to Rabbanon. You did Hatova of the 5 Neiros. Then they did the Ketores, and then they did the Hatova of the 2 Neiros. Why would our Mishnah, the first Mishnah, be speaking about the last 2 Neiros, and the second Mishnah would be referring to the first 5 Neiros? The order seems to be out of sequence. The Abaya says it's no problem. Says the first Mishnah is not talking about Yom Kippur. It's talking about just all the avodas that would be done, that the Kohen Gadol should do. So the Mishnah was just teaching us the Kohen Gadol should do that Tovas HaNeros. The Mishnah chose to speak about the last 2 candles for whatever reason, but the Mishnah wasn't going out of its way to make sure the order was right. It's only from the second perek where we start the order of, and all the Mishnayos are almost a single Mishnah of a single sequence of the Yom Kippur Avodah. From perek base, everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. So the Mishnah on Daf Chof Hei is talking about the Hatova of the first 5 Neiros, and the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph is talking about the Hatova of the second 2 Neiros, and it's all in order. V'sidra ha'hodatonile. After the first Mishnah, after the first perek, when it comes to the second perek, the Seder, the order is all in order and everything is okay. And therefore, Abaya was not concerned about the reservation of Papa had against him about the order of the Mishnayos. And in Yitzchok Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.